At D23 in 2015, Disney took to the stage to announce an ambitious plan to reimagine Disney's Hollywood studios. From its opening, the park had the goal of taking guests behind the scenes of the film industry and immersing guests in the magic of movie making. The failure of Hollywood East, though, left the park in this weird limbo without active productions to support this theme and also the backbone of the park, the Backlot Tram Tour. Disney made the decision to close the Backlot Tour and replace its massive footprint with 2 immersive lands that would try to shift the park's goal to bring guests into the movies themselves. The first land, and really the first major piece of this transformation, would open in the summer of 2018. Toy Story Land took the concepts of previous lands that had been a success at Disney's international parks and tried to replicate and improve upon them at Walt Disney World. But were they successful? Even before Toy Story Land, Disney MGM Studios found itself as the first big landing pad for the Toy Story characters at Disney World. After the first movie's release in 1995, Disney would replace Aladdin's Royal Caravan in the park with a new Toy Story parade. This parade would be creatively titled the Toy Story Parade. And I kind of respect it, sometimes the simpler name is better. This parade followed the tradition of the Eisner era of getting the characters of a new movie into the parks as soon as possible. And the parade would run daily until 1997, when it was replaced with the Hercules Parade to promote that film's release. But Toy Story didn't leave MGM for good when the parade left. Pizza Planet Arcade made its way out of the film and into the previously generic studio arcade that was back near Muppet Vision 3D. It opened right at the end of 1995 and retained a lot of the arcade machines that were already there, but otherwise was a pretty quickly thrown together overlay to get more Toy Story into the parks as the movie became a cultural phenomenon and was catapulting Pixar into the powerhouse that they are today. The next permanent Toy Story addition to the resort would help kick off the marketing campaign for the second film in the franchise. Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin opened in November 1998, and like Pizza Planet, it was a reskin of the former If You Had Wings Delta Dreamflight ride system. It even just reused the marquee sign in the ladder, which is still there to this day. The ride did retrofit laser blasters onto the Omnimover system and gave guests control over their own rotation to bring a shooting dark ride to the Magic Kingdom and basically every other resort shortly after. Back over at Disney MGM Studios, the park was in a weird state of flux. The dreams of Hollywood East were short-lived, and the sound stages and exteriors in the park were rarely, if ever, used. It's not really ideal for a park that's relying on them to provide entertainment on its Backlot Tour. Disney tried adding in more live entertainment to the park themselves, with Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It, and Lights, Motors, Action Extreme Stunt Show. Along with this, they added in rides like Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster. These additions helped mitigate the issues of the studios part of Disney MGM Studios not working, but it just added to this confusing nature of the park as a whole. Maybe most symbolic of this was the construction of the Sorcerer Hat right in front of the original centerpiece of the park in the Chinese theater. Even though, personally I do have a really strong nostalgia for it. It was very 2000s, okay? But in 2007, Disney would make 2 major announcements for the park. The first was that the park would undergo a name change, dropping MGM out of the picture and broadening the horizons to Hollywood as a whole. And on January 7, 2008, the park would rebrand to Disney's Hollywood Studios. The second announcement Disney would make would start with the closing of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It in 2006. Disney would officially announce its replacement, Toy Story Midway Mania, and by extension, a mini land known as Pixar Place. This would replace the old Mickey Avenue that was there previously. The new area would take inspiration from Pixar Studios in California as a way to try and still tie into the general studio theme that the park was clinging on to. The ride itself, though, was described as the next evolution of interactive ride game experiences. Basically, Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin on steroids. Construction moved quickly, and the ride would open on May 31st, 2008, with a celebration including sending Buzz Lightyear to space. Like, literally.
You're cleared for launch. Just remember one thing. I'm the real Buzz.
We have visual contact. Go, go, go!
Make way for the pig.
Howdy, partners!
Climb aboard.
Carnivores versus pork bellies?
You're on, old school.
Your mission, get there. The all-new attraction, Toy Story Mania. It's 4D, which is one better than 3D.
Security. Works every time.
Now at Disney's Hollywood Studios.
The ride almost immediately became the family favorite of the park. It consistently drew the longest line in the park because, unlike the other major rides of the park, it was something that basically anyone in the family could ride and have a good time on. It also had amazing re-rideability with the video game aspect of the ride.
I had the high score at one point, but then some little kids, they're about this tall, got 340,000 points, and I only got my highest was 175,000, but I beat her, and that was the important part.
We have tested it with kids from age 2 to 92, and they all have a fantastic time. There are easy scores, there are difficult targets, there are hidden things, and the more you play, the better you get.
Midway Mania cemented the Toy Story characters' home base at Hollywood Studios going forward. While they would show up at the other parks, they felt most at home at the studios.
Game over.
Okay, so now we're back to the 2015 D23 announcement. Disney was going to close the backlot tour basically immediately and replace it with 2 separate immersive lands. The first announced was Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, but later in the presentation, Disney announced that they would be bringing Toy Story Land to the other part of the former backlot.
Of course, Star Wars is a major component of this work, but that's not all we're doing here. Because ever since we were introduced to Buzz, Woody, and everyone in Andy's room 20 years ago, the characters of Star Wars, or Toy Story, have found a lasting place in the hearts of all our fans. Now, we've brought their stories to a number of parks in a number of ways, including at Disney California Adventure and Disney's Hollywood Studios with the popular Toy Story Mania. And we're pleased to tell you that we have new plans to take you to infinity and beyond. To help celebrate 20 years of fun with the Toy Story gang, I'm pleased to announce that we're bringing Toy Story Land to Disney's Hollywood Studios. And this will be part of our ongoing work as we transform this park, that one that takes you from behind the scenes, now the one that puts you in them.
Something interesting to note, though, is that this wasn't their first rodeo with a Toy Story Land. It's actually going to be the third. However, in the announcement, they actually talked more about Cars Land at Disney's California Adventure as an inspiration point than the existing Toy Story lands.
And we're taking it from a behind-the-scenes making of story, and we're trying to build more immersive experiences that will allow our guests to go into their favorite movies. And that's exactly what we want to do with Toy Story Land. As I know you're aware, we did something very similar across the street fairly successfully with Cars Land, where we take you into the world of Radiator Springs, and that's exactly the level of immersion that we're aiming for Florida. We had a great story on opening day at Cars Land where we heard a little boy ask his mom if this is where the movie Cars was made. And that, I know, and that set a new level for us. That was it. I mean, we are on to something. So we're so excited to be bringing Toy Story Land to the studio.
So why would Disney want to distance this iteration from the others? Let's start by talking about what the others had to offer. The first Toy Story Playland opened at Walt Disney Studios in Paris in 2010. Walt Disney Studios Park was a very budget park when it opened, and may have had the worst reputation of any Disney park in the world, even to this day. By 2009, when the addition was announced, the park was kind of still in a state of throwing spaghetti at the wall to try to get something to stick and get guests to visit. Toy Story would add a full land to the park that could still be done for relatively cheap. It also would open just after the release of the third movie in the franchise. And the land was designed to shrink guests down to the size of toys in Andy's backyard. This was something that wasn't too difficult to accomplish with, the use of oversized toy props and the heavy use of bamboo to replicate the scale of grass. The land has 3 rides. Toy Soldier's Parachute Drop is a fun reskin of a pretty standard parachute jump flat ride that you can find at parks across the world. Except for Great Adventure. No. Slinky Dog Zigzag Spin is also a fun reskin of a common flat ride, this time the Caterpillar ride type, but it doesn't implement a cover like you often see with these rides. The final ride is an Intamin Surf Rider themed to RC Racer. Unlike the other coasters this model, the trains all seat facing forward and they don't spin, but it's still very, very close to a stock ride. These rides weren't groundbreaking or necessarily innovative, but they added much needed capacity and brought something new to a park that was desperate for it. Speaking of a park desperate for something new and added capacity, Hong Kong Disneyland was the first and hopefully only budget castle park. Toy Story Land was announced as one of 3 new lands to try to bring it in line with the other castle parks. Toy Story would be the first of the new lands to open and would be a near exact clone of the Paris land, and it was built just beyond the berm on an expansion pad. So Toy Story Land at Hollywood Studios was their first time shaking up the concept with new rides. This started by moving the entrance of Toy Story Midway Mania into the land and taking it out of Pixar Place. They also took over an additional old soundstage to build a 3rd track to increase the ride's capacity and hopefully reduce wait times. It also took on a name change that I still struggle to remember every single time I'm at the park. It's no longer Midway Mania, it's just Mania.
Do you think we call it Mania for nothing? Oh no!
On the backside of the land, by Galaxy's Edge, is Alien Swirling Saucers. It's a whip ride similar to Mater's Junkyard Jamboree in Cars Land. Also on the far side of the land, next to Alien Swirling Saucers, is the quick service restaurant Woody's Lunchbox, which serves up pretty solid theme park quick service food. In the center of the land is a path to Slinky Dog Dash, a custom mock family launch coaster themed to Slinky Dog. The coaster features 2 launches and wraps around the back of the land and several scenery pieces. It serves as an introductory roller coaster for kids, but has a bit more of a bite than some people would expect. Outside the Toy Story Mania queue is a meet and greet opportunity with Jessie and Woody. Then back at the right entrance to the land is a meet and greet opportunity with Buzz. And the Green Army men will periodically march throughout the land as well. At opening, that was Toy Story Land, and it opened officially to the public on June 30th, 2018.
Oh, wow! Bob, I gotta say, it looks like our guests are ready to join in some fun.
We'd like to take this to the next level. To infinity and beyond.
Of course, that's a great idea. So friends, guests and toys of all ages, welcome to Andy's backyard. Sarge, will you please do the honors?
I'm now going to pull the lever to activate Slinky Dog Dash and Toy Story Land.
Sarge?
I forgot the batteries, Bob.
Immediately after opening, opinion on the land was split, with some loving the theming and the new rides, while others saw flaws in the layout of the land and the lack of new experiences. Overall, though, it seemed the general consensus of the land was positive. Families loved the new rides that, for the most part, everyone could enjoy. And there's also this undeniable charm to the oversized toy theming throughout the land. Toy Story inherently, as a property, brings a sense of nostalgia to adults and a sense of wonder to kids, which is something you see talked about a lot in the early days of the land. The details of the 90s and early 2000s toys were praised and made a lot of guests ignore some of the flaws that others would point out.
I think that families that have kids that are going to go to this land are going to really enjoy themselves. The parents have a lot to look at because there are a lot of nostalgic toys that we don't really have nowadays.
I thought it was so cute. I liked it a lot more than Mine Train. It had I don't know, the queue was adorable. The whole thing was just so cute. I grew up on Toy Story, so it's like a lot of nostalgia for me. And I love Slinky Dog because
yeah, I enjoyed going to Toy Story Land, and I genuinely enjoy this land, and I can't wait to go back in the future.
Woody, this place is so much fun! I remember playing with you when I was a kid. Wait a minute. Your movie came out in '95. Ugh, I'm so old.
It was also important to remember that at this time, in a lot of people's eyes, Disney could do no wrong. There was a consumer trust that had built up over the years, so when Disney announced the reimagining in the park, including Toy Story Land, there was already a largely positive expectation in contrast to now. Another part of that was, well, it was a new Disney World expansion in the late 2010s. It was gonna draw a crowd. Securing a Slinky Dog Dash Fast Pass became a blood sport, and the land was packed all day, every day, for basically the entire first year of opening. Even Toy Story Mania, with its added capacity, wasn't immune from the crowds, and its wait time maintained its previous popularity on a regular basis. All this being said, at opening there was a shine to Toy Story Land that had most people seeing it as a win for the park, and the resort as a whole.
Good morning, everyone. Whoa, that's force right there. On behalf of everyone at Disney Parks, Experiences and Products, thank you for joining us here at the edge of the galaxy.
In August of 2019, Toy Story Land got its sister land in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. This land was a huge deal and took a lot of attention away from Toy Story Land. Galaxy's Edge, after a few months, had Rise of the Resistance as his major e-ticket draw that was seen as the best ride at the resort. While this overshadowed Toy Story Land to an extent, Toy Story Land's popularity still stayed high, with it appealing to a different audience than a lot of what Galaxy's Edge offered. In early March of 2020, just before the whole thing, the reimagining of Hollywood Studios would actually be completed alongside the opening of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which replaced the Great Movie Ride as the center stage attraction at the park. The ride and the new Hollywood Studios as a whole weren't the slam dunk that a lot of enthusiasts and critics had hoped for, but general opinion still had somewhat of a positive sentiment to it. This reimagined Hollywood Studios didn't even have a month to get its foothold before COVID forced the parks to close for nearly 4 months.
Good morning, Dan. I am here. Today is the day Walt Disney World welcoming guests back for the first time in months. Magic Kingdom, Animal Kingdom opening today. The other parks later next week. Amid the pandemic, it'll be a new Disney experience for everyone, one with new safety protocols throughout.
Once Disney World reopened in July, the parks had been stripped to their bare bones to function in a COVID environment. Now, we could talk about, all those changes and how they impacted perception and reality of the resort, but that's probably better saved for a different video at this point. But for the purposes of Hollywood Studios, the consumer trust in the Disney brand was slipping fast, especially as COVID restrictions eased up and changes and cuts made during COVID stayed in place. This didn't help the already tepid reaction to the new Hollywood Studios, and negative opinions began to really come to the forefront as the shine of the changes wore off faster than Disney expected. While Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway and Galaxy's Edge got their fair share of criticism, it seems like Toy Story Land always would get the brunt of it with those more critical of the Disney parks. Toy Story Land started to get a reputation for being a hot, crowded, underwhelming addition to a park that might have been better off before its addition. At the same time, though, Disney seemed to validate this sentiment in a way. If you go back to the original concept art for Toy Story Land, you'll notice some buildings on the right side of the land that didn't come to fruition. Oh, at least kinda initially. While COVID restrictions were still in place, Disney announced that they'd be expanding, or to an extent, bringing this area back to reality, with the addition of a table service restaurant to the land in Roundup Rodeo Barbecue. While its facade was far more scaled back than the original concept art, the addition to the land seemed to show Disney's interest in updating the land and trying to solve the crowding issues at Woody's Lunchbox that had been present since opening. Roundup Rodeo Barbecue opened in May of 2023 and got mixed reviews at opening, with the food quality seeming to hold back people's opinions. The theming and atmosphere, however, felt very cohesive to the rest of Toy Story Land, with an excess of basic cutouts and props to create this sense of a restaurant built out of toys. Then add in the audio cues and the fine china to really elevate the experience above the more standard table service offerings at the park. As time went on, the food quality seemed to improve, and along with it, the reviews of Roundup Rodeo. However, Woody's Lunchbox still maintained its place as an incredibly popular quick service. So yet again, Disney went back to the land and has attempted to improve the guest experience by building an additional shaded seating area near the quick service. Albeit they've built it incredibly slowly, but these additions to the land relatively shortly after its opening show that Disney took some of the critiques of the land to heart. They saw needs for the land and addressed them. So now it kind of seems like the land is complete in Disney's eyes. But even quote-unquote complete, is Toy Story Land a success? On one hand, the land took Hollywood Studios from a park with one traditional ride that appealed directly to kids, to a park with 3 all tied together in a nostalgic backyard. Also, while Disney will never give official numbers, The backlot tram tour had an insanely high theoretical capacity, but at the same time wasn't always taking full advantage of that, especially towards the end of its life. Replacing it with a more diverse set of rides between Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge helps to spread the crowds out more across the rides. The land has also finally given Toy Story a home at the resort instead of being spread out across all the different lands and parks. Toy Story as a franchise has shown it has a strong staying power and has an underlying theme that appeals to people who have and haven't seen the movies. Toy Story Land becoming one of the main faces of Hollywood studios has only helped keep the IP relevant between major releases, and has made the land successful in that regard. On the other hand though, Toy Story Land at Hollywood Studios inherited some problems from the original iterations of the land that might not have been as apparent at those parks. Toy Story Land at Walt Disney Studios Park was built fast and relatively cheap for Disney. The park just needed rides to fill space and draw crowds to the studio and the resort as a whole. Decisions like all 3 rides being reskins of things that you could find in amusement parks around the world, without a ton of work being done to elevate their theming, at least to the level that people had come to expect of Disney, caused issue. But in a park alongside the theming of Le Tapis Volant, it was able to shine as a new addition in comparison. Similarly, when cloned in Hong Kong, the budget nature of the park and need for rides let Toy Story Land be viewed through rose-colored glasses. At Hollywood Studios, it seemed like they tried to solve this with the more obscure whip system for the flat ride, a longer coaster in Slinky Dog Dash, and bringing in Toy Story Mania to the land. While this was an improvement, it still feels lacking. I think a lot of this ties back to the lack of a narrative, story-driven attraction. While the rides have backstory, there's no narrative that guests follow and immerse themselves in. Think of every other land that has rides at Hollywood Studios. Each one has at least one ride that brings guests through a clear story. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, Star Tours, Tower of Terror, Rise of the Resistance. Even something like Smuggler's Run, while being interactive like Toy Story Mania, has a story beyond just piloting the Millennium Falcon, or in Toy Story's case, shooting targets on the Midway. Disney's at their best when they're telling a story through their rides, and so the absence of that in Toy Story Land adds to this weird sense of the land being elevated amusement park rides and not really theme park rides. You may be saying, well, isn't the whole land themed to the idea that Andy built an amusement park in his backyard for his toys? Yeah, and the rides do fit into the story of the land as a whole, but they aren't the story themselves. I think the story of the overall land actually lends itself really well to a story-driven dark ride. If we're toys alongside Woody and Buzz, wouldn't it make sense for us to join in on one of the gang's adventures, or be a part of Andy's imagination? Another aspect it inherited was the tight footprint that was used in the originals. Unlike a lot of theme park lands, there's no real plaza or space to spread out in Toy Story Land. It's just one relatively narrow pathway. This is only made worse by the target audience of the land being the most likely to bring a stroller and have to park it along the path. Also, the queue for Slinky Dog Dash regularly spilling onto the pathway. And the fact that the path is a part of the main loop of the park, meaning that there's also a lot of through traffic. Oh yeah, and because the main gift shop didn't survive the original plans, it's now only accessible by riding Toy Story Mania or walking through the crowd of people exiting that ride. To combat this, Disney put merch carts throughout the land, taking away more space from the paths, all giving this very congested feeling to the walkways. While in Paris and Hong Kong, the lands were offshoots from the main pathways and crowds. Combine this congestion with the decision to achieve the overgrown grass look with just bamboo at the edges of the land, and you end up lacking the shade that you really need in a theme park. I have to imagine this was done as a cost savings and the expectation that shade wouldn't be as critical in Paris. So there was less of a need for overgrown landscaping crossing over the land like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure. Actually, if you look at some of the original concept art for Toy Story Playland in Paris, you can see more defined grass blades mixed in with the bamboo. And I think a mixture of the two could really have allowed for some thematic shade in the land and would have helped the land not feel like the Sahara Desert every Florida summer. So would I call Toy Story Land a success? No. Now, that is my opinion, and even that has changed in the process of writing this video. And I definitely do think there are good things about the land overall. I just don't think it reaches the bar that was set in their initial comparison to Cars Land at the announcement. While they used Cars Land as their reference in the presentation, it seems clear that they were taking the plans from Paris and Hong Kong and trying to evolve them into something a little bit more unique. Unfortunately, as the project actually evolved, the few unique aspects of the Orlando version became less and less prevalent, and what opened was the original lands with Toy Story Midway Mania tacked onto the back of it. The land takes on the budget nature of the quick fix lands that came before it, and it shows through. In this case though, I hesitate to say that budget cuts were the reason that the land wasn't given more of the Cars Land treatment. At the time the land was being developed and constructed, Disney didn't shy away from spending money on projects. However, when they made the decision to close the backlot tour and use that land for both Toy Story and Star Wars, decisions had to be made quickly, as they were basically inviting guests to skip visiting Hollywood studios until the projects were complete. So anything to speed up the construction timeline would be beneficial. Things like pesky tunnels, intricate facades, and additional merch building or table service restaurant and indoor meet and greet space. Getting Toy Story Land built in just over 2 years gave Disney the extra time it needed to spend on Galaxy's Edge, and meant that the park was only without any of the old backlot and Great Movie Ride for less than a year. Toy Story Land also lost the battle for additional space on the former backlot. At the time of development, Star Wars had just come under Disney's umbrella, and they had big plans in the parks and beyond. Disney saw Star Wars as their own Harry Potter for the parks, and with the sequel trilogy coinciding with development and construction, Disney saw a synergy goldmine on their hands. Because of that, Galaxy's Edge was given a much larger plot of backlot to work with, and Toy Story Land got a similar sized area to the existing ones. I think these factors didn't set the land up to be successful, and that is still pretty evident even as Disney has added to land over the time. Ultimately, Toy Story Land at Hollywood Studios is a remixed clone of a quick fix land that was used to add life into parks that just needed something new. And that's why to me it wasn't successful. Now, in Disney's opinion though, I think they may still view Toy Story Land as a success. Alongside the construction of Hollywood Studios' version, Disney greenlit a fourth version of Toy Story Land to be built as the first major expansion to Shanghai Disneyland, coming just a few years after the park's opening. This land was a more direct clone of the originals, but swapped out the Toy Soldier parachute drop with Woody's Roundup, which is the same ride system as Alien Swirling Saucers. I think this additional land being greenlit shows that Disney felt that this would be a success and not just work in their budget parks, but also in their newest and most visited resorts. They've also gone back and brought additional theming inspired by the Hollywood Studios version of the land and are actively bringing it to a new entrance at the Walt Disney Studios park, as that whole park undergoes its own reimagining. Toy Story Land is still one of the faces of Hollywood Studios and all of Disney's marketing. And it still draws a crowd. Whether or not that's from the circumstance of the park and the resort it's in, who's to say? But every ride in Toy Story Land has a decent wait time on any given day. Even Alien Swirling Saucers stays around a 30-minute wait on most days. Plus, it's Toy Story, and Bob Iger is still the Disney CEO. And I think that man loves Toy Story more than anyone else on this planet. Toy Story Land and the opinions around it showcase the complexity of how Disney tried to reimagine Disney's Hollywood Studios as a whole. While the park's identity was already shifting and changing by the time the park dropped MGM from its name, Toy Story Land was the definitive start of a new era for the park. However, the land itself was never designed to be a flagship park-defining addition, let alone the first domino in a complete reimagining of a park that had built a cult following. After everything I've said here, I think it all boils down to this. While myself and a lot of other people may not think that Toy Story Land is a success for the park that we want Hollywood Studios to be, I think Toy Story Land is a success for the park that Disney wants Hollywood Studios to be. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. When I started writing this, I actually wasn't sure whether or not I would consider Toy Story Land a success. So it was actually really interesting to kind of develop my opinion while writing this and while looking into the history of the land and what came before it. I also visited the land a lot for this video, And that definitely shaped the direction of it for better or for worse. But thanks as always for your support though. It's still kind of crazy to me that there are people out there who want to listen to me talk about theme parks for hours. So yeah, if you're still watching, like, subscribe, comment your thoughts on Toy Story Land. I also have a Twitter and Instagram. I've been trying to do more like photography in the parks, and it's been really fun. And it's kind of cool to share something different other than video. So yeah, thanks again for watching.
The path that Iger has started, or do you envision more need for change or potential acquisitions or sort of shifts down the line?
I suspect